We are now allowed use of any ship in Starfleet at our discretion, whether we end up joining the Federation or not. And 10 points on the back end of every holonovel program in perpetuity.
I don't think they have back end, but yes.
Uh-huh. Also, the Nagus would like you to dance for him.
Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here with another Star Trek Lower Decks episode review for you. In this video, I'm taking a look at one of my favorite episodes of the season, and certainly one of my favorite titles of the season, Parth Ferengi's Heart Place. Warning as always for spoilers for this episode. So first of all, let's talk about that title. Now, before the last few weeks, I was not familiar with the British television show Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which this episode plays on the title of. Since then, I've now gone back and watched just the first episode of the show, but definitely want to watch more. I think there's only 6 episodes and 1 season, so it's definitely not a huge time commitment, but this television show is wild. It's off the wall. It stars a very young Matt Berry, who looks like a kid, basically, compared to how we know him now from shows like What We Do in the Shadows. And it also stars a younger Richard Ayoade, who looks basically the same. I want to know what his secret is. It's crazy. Anyway, Garth Marenghi's Dark Place really has nothing to do with this episode of Lower Decks other than the riff on the title, Parth Ferengi's Heart Place, which, again, I just love. But let's get to the actual episode, which I also love. So we start out with another attack by this mysterious force that we've seen throughout the season, this time on a Ferengi vessel. This time it's a little bit different, though. One of the members of the Ferengi crew seems to be in on it. When the ship first attacks, he notes that it's right on time and then makes a comment a little later about, "They told me we would make a profit." So he's in on this. There's some sort of dealing going on here, which is interesting and an aspect that we haven't outright seen before. That ship would appear to be lost, just like all the other ships, before we get to the main title sequence and the main plot of this episode, which also involves the Ferengi. The USS Cerritos, along with the USS Toronto, a Parliament-class ship, are at Ferenginar to negotiate the Ferengi signing an application to join the Federation. This made me really happy. I said in a recent episode of Positively Trek that one of my wishes for Lower Decks was to see them kind of have a larger influence on the politics of Star Trek, or establish something that means something more to the wider universe, which maybe would seem to go kind of against the mission statement of Lower Decks, where that they're kind of the least important ship in the fleet. But this episode definitely fulfills that, seeing here the first steps of the Ferengi joining the Federation, a dream that will get realized, we'll see, some number of years hence. We don't know exactly when, but by the time of Star Trek Discovery, it would seem that they are a part of the Federation. So while Captain Freeman is negotiating along with Admiral Vassery with the Ferengi, represented by Rom and Lita, we get travel guide duty for the junior officers. This means Boimler is gung-ho to see as many sights as he can. Mariner is going to hit up bars. And it turns out that Tendi and Rutherford are going to have to pretend to be a married couple to enjoy some of the amenities available to married couples visiting Ferenginar. They initially react to this assignment with some joy. They think it's going to be a lot of fun, but it gets a little too real very quickly. And we obviously know there's this latent attraction between the two characters. They have such terrific chemistry together, but pretending to be married hits maybe a little bit too close to home, and they find themselves continually embarrassed, feeling uncomfortable, and not really at ease pretending to have this relationship. Unfortunately, they find out that it's one of the greatest felonies on Ferenginar to pretend to be married to get a good deal, which kind of makes sense for Ferengi culture. Meanwhile, Boimler gets sidetracked from his mission by watching trash Ferengi television, basically. I loved this little bit of a story here where kind of, I think a lot of us see ourselves in Boimler's place sometimes, where we're like, oh, you know, we don't watch reality TV, that kind of trashy stuff, or X, Y, or Z, or advertising doesn't work on us. We're above that sort of thing. But then, of course, we find ourselves falling into the same traps, the psychological mind games that advertisers play on us and that work extremely well. We're just human after all, and Boimler is just human and falls for some of these tricks. He of course says, I'm going to make sure to find out the pitfalls so that other people who are less aware than I am don't fall prey to these temptations. And of course, he just ends up spending hours glued to the idiot box watching Ferengi television and ridiculous trashy shows. I love that. I thought that was hilarious. Mariner, in the meantime, is dealing with her own issues, and they don't quite get resolved in this episode. We see that she's kind of chafing against this new direction that her life is taking, where she's getting some responsibility and things are kind of going her way. And she's kind of been made aware about how she sabotages it. And she doesn't really know what to do with that. She's kind of finding herself pushing against things and not really having somewhere to direct those feelings, which is interesting. And I've seen online some people see this as a step back for her character, but I see this as a step on the road to confronting those issues and kind of coming to terms with them and really figuring out what's behind them. She has some self-reflection in this, which is instigated by her relationship with Quimp. By the way, great to see Quimp again. He was the Ferengi that we see in, I think the second episode of Lower Decks. Good friend of Mariner's, pretends to be the last outpost throwback type Ferengi, but, is a really nice guy with a monocle who vacations with his wife on Risa. So it was great to see him again. I thought that was fun. I love the kind of relationship that he and Mariner have. I was recently on the Infinite Diversity podcast with Chrissy DeClercq-Salagi and Thad Haight, and they had a great take on Mariner in that she seems like that friend from high school who never really quite grew up, and you go back to your hometown and they're still talking about, throwing the winning touchdown at the high school football game and drinking and never really getting past their youth. And Mariner kind of exhibits that a little bit here, with Quimp being the long-suffering friend who kind of has to put up with this. I thought that was an interesting dynamic for sure. So meanwhile, back on the USS Toronto, we've got these negotiations happening. And first of all, it's so great to hear Max Grodenchik as Rom and Chase Masterson as Lita once again. Deep Space Nine just has such a special place in my heart, and Rom is one of my favorite characters. Another one of those characters that just has this incredible arc over the course of the 7 years, and it's so fun to see him actually leading the Ferengi government and what that looks like. Now, at first, he's kind of playing the idiot. Everybody underestimated him early on in Deep Space Nine. He came across as an idiot, but as the series went on, you realize he's incredibly intelligent, a great engineer, and really quite savvy. And this episode kind of plays on that first impression that people get and people underestimating him. But he and Lita have this plan to kind of bilk the Federation, basically, and get all these clauses added to the agreement before they sign it. And Admiral Vassery goes in just thinking it's going to be a cakewalk, it's going to be no big deal. But Captain Freeman is more aware of what's actually going on and sees through this. And I love that she gets proven right by the end of the episode. We get some wonderful moments with Vassery being made to dance. That was fun. I loved the animation of his little dance moves. It was nice how she turned the tables on them and out-Ferengi'd the Ferengi, basically, and got them to agree to an impossible part of the clause. And Rom is impressed, says that she really understands Ferengi culture and that he will sign the original agreement. So that was fun. I thought that was really good. It would have been interesting that if, this new clause did get signed and basically in the future we see, Rom and Lita trying really hard to get Kronos to join the Federation or something. But I did like this resolution signing the original agreement that they had previously agreed to. Little interesting tidbits from this episode. The Hugcierge, Parth, was played by Dave Foley of Kids in the Hall fame. I love Kids in the Hall, and Dave Foley is one of my comedic heroes. I think he's a hilarious person. So glad that he's a part of Star Trek now. That's very cool. The TV shows that we see, my favorite, Pog and Dar, Cop Landlords. The satire of of this show is so much fun. Cop landlords and their dialogue. That was a lovely bit of reflection on our society by the writers of Lower Decks. Very nice. And interestingly, we see this person in the background of the shot showing that while Ferengi women can legally wear clothes now, some still choose not to. And of course, the ending bit with Tendi and Rutherford where they say, we just don't have any natural chemistry, and them climbing into the Jeffries tubes. Man, these two, they're so ridiculously cute together. They just need to admit that they have feelings, but that's up to them. They could stay best friends forever, and that would be a wonderful relationship as well. So I just love these two together. I think the writers and the actors playing them have really hit on something wonderful between the two of them, and I just love how they work together. So like I said, probably my favorite episode of the season, one of my favorite episodes of Lower Decks. It's right up there, at least in the top 3 or 4, I think. So huge props to the writers and performers for Parth Ferengi's Heart Place. So let's get to the Easter eggs from this episode, and there are a huge number of them, so I'll go through them fairly quickly. First of all, we're dealing with a Ferengi, so we get a number of rules of acquisition. We have, it's always good business to know about new customers before they walk in your door. We have Rule 63, the riskier the road, the greater the profit. Captain Freeman also mentions rule of acquisition number 10, but never says it. I looked it up, and number 10 is greed is eternal. And Rom mentions rule of acquisition number 8 at the end of the episode, small print leads to large risk. The Ferengi ship we see at the start of the episode is somewhat similar to the one we see in the Enterprise episode Acquisition. We have a miniature Genesis device, which are apparently now used for terraforming planets. The Genesis device, of course, was a plot point from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. We have this Enterprise cheese board. This is available. You can buy it. This is an actual real-life product, which ties in nicely to the joke later on about advertising within the actual television show. Admiral Vassery, of course, is back. He was on Lower Decks back in Season 1. Vassery mentions Moab 4 inside the dome versus outside the dome. It is quite a funny joke if you realize that Moab 4 is the domed community from the 5th season TNG episode, The Masterpiece Society, the genetically engineered habitat of humans in that episode. As mentioned, of course, we have Grand Nagus Rom and First Clerk Lita, Max Grodenchik, and Chase Masterson reprising their roles. They also have a Hupyrian servant. Grand Nagus Zek also had a Hupyrian servant named Mayhardu, and acting Grand Nagus Brunt had a Hupyrian servant as well, very popular amongst Ferengi leaders. Rom's love of baseball comes up several times in this episode. This would stem from his experience playing it with Sisko and his crew in the Deep Space Nine episode Take Me Out to the Holosuite. Several times in this episode, Mariner is playing with a self-sealing stem bolt. These were introduced in the first season of Deep Space Nine. We're not exactly entirely sure what they're for, but they are involved in the construction of reverse ratcheting router planers. We see this Ferenginar cityscape, similar to the matte paintings that we saw in Deep Space Nine. Also visible throughout the episode are these Ferengi shuttles, the first of which we saw in the TNG episode The Price. Advertisements include those for Sluggo Cola. This was first seen in the DS9 episode Profit and Lace. Quarks, of course, we know that Quark has franchised his bar from Deep Space Nine. We also see this Maximum Umox rub dungeon. Umox is the pleasuring technique that involves rubbing a Ferengi's ears. Boimler's hotel room is of typical Ferengi design. Quark's home looked very similar. The view screen in Boimler's room looks very much like the CBSI logo. This goes again with the gag about advertising in the show. When Boimler talks about that, we see the very prominent Paramount logo behind him with the twinkling stars to draw your eye. I did laugh out loud at this. I thought that was great. Quimp mentions that Mariner was busted down in rank for crashing an Oberth. This is definitely something I would love to see at some point. The Oberth class, of course, is the small Federation science vessel. The first that we saw on screen was the USS Grissom in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. Mariner orders Cardassian tequila and a dagger of the mind. We don't know what makes up this drink, but the name of it comes from the TOS episode, Dagger of the Mind, from Season 1. Speaking of TOS Season 1, we see a dog of the same species that we saw in the TOS episode The Enemy Within in the Pogandar TV show. We see several Dabo tables. Mariner mentions that she sits weird in chairs a la Riker. I have to say I also love the Dominion War Losses Memorial, not to the lives lost in the Dominion War, but to the profits lost in the war. As Mariner says, the Ferengi stay on brand. And finally, I have to talk about Quark's Federation Experience, which is basically the now defunct Star Trek experience from Las Vegas, but on Ferenginar. I loved this. I really, really miss this place, the real one in Vegas, and it was so much fun to see this kind of homage to it here. We have the motion picture / The Next Generation music playing throughout this scene. We have a Spock costume, the Guardian of Forever, a Mugato, a Vulcan gong, the large hominid creatures from the Galileo 7, these warp nacelles, 10 forward, a gift shop called Where No Gift Has Gone Before, the of course huge Enterprise D and Voyager models hanging above. The security officers that work here are wearing TNG security officer uniforms. The blind box at the end looks like the Galileo shuttlecraft. We have this door labeled Jeffrey's Tube Entrance, red shirts, and Holodeck Arcade. Well, those were my thoughts on this episode as well as the Easter eggs that I found. Were there any that I missed? Please let me know in the comments. This episode was just chock full of stuff. It was so much fun. Like I said, one of my favorite episodes of Lower Decks so far. But what did you think? I would love to know. Please leave your comments below. And thank you so much to the Patreon supporters for all of your help in bringing this episode to you. Truly do appreciate it. To everyone else, thank you so much for watching. That is literally the best thing you can do for my channel is watch the videos. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I will see you in the next video, which will be a review of the next episode of Lower Decks, A Few Badgies More. I wonder what that one could be about. See you then, and live long and prosper.